Cool. U.S. stocks, they extended their losses for a second straight session Thursday afternoon. This following a series of economic reports that missed expectations as well as mixed earnings reports. But first, we begin on the economic front with weekly jobless claims gaining 4,000 to a seasonally adjusted 352,000. Also, business activity in the mid-Atlantic region that expanded at a smaller than expected rate. And the future gauge of U.S. economic activity that fell in March for the first time in 7 months. Meanwhile, over in Europe, Italy's parliament, they voted to find a successor to President Giorgio Napolitano, whose mandate expires on May 15th. And with gold prices inching higher and with the euro higher against the U.S. dollar, it looked to be yet another volatile finish for the big board. Speaking of which, taking a look now to see how the Dow Jones has closed out today's trading session. The Dow Jones is on the downside, 81.45 points to settle in at 14,537.14. In a breakdown of today's major market movers, we first begin with shares of Apple, which fell amid worries over second quarter iPad mini shipments and after one of its suppliers reported an inventory glut. Meanwhile, Morgan Stanley reported quarterly results that topped expectations due to strong gains in its global wealth management and securities units. However, Morgan Stanley did see its revenue from fixed income and commodities trading fall from 1 year earlier. PepsiCo edged higher after the beverage company also posted better than expected quarterly earnings as well as revenue. And Verizon on the upside today, this after the company topped earnings estimates, but revenue that fell slightly below expectations. And lastly, eBay, it fell after the online auction company delivered guidance that was not to the pleasure of Wall Street analysts, even though the company did post a slight beat on its earnings report.